I'm going to talk a little bit about Gestalt therapy and how it relates to my work or how it came about. So I start with a little background. I was already working with children, emotionally disturbed children in the schools. I have a master's in special education with emotionally disturbed children, and that was what I was doing, but I never felt really satisfied with what I was doing. I never had quite a rationale. I knew about all the other therapies that were people used with kids, not too many, but none of it seemed to fit totally for me. But then sort of something happened that was separate, of course, from all this. One of my children became very ill. He had an illness called systemic lupus, which is an immune disease. It rejects your own organs. And it started with him with rejecting his kidneys. And the doctors told us he had a year to live. And that's pretty astounding to hear something like that. And it was for us very difficult. And of course we went and got second and third opinions, and it was always the same. Anyway, during this time, as the year, he was almost 14, 13. As the year progressed, I became more and more depressed, very depressed. I went to a couple of therapists and they cried, and I ended up comforting them. And it only got worse. And finally, some friend of ours said he was going up to Esalen Institute in Big Sur and doing a workshop with a man named Jim Simpkin, a Gestalt therapist. So I thought, all right, I knew about Gestalt therapy, but I didn't know really much about it. So I went up there and spent a little over a week working with Jim Simpkin. And it was astounding. I mean, he worked with me a lot in that time. Worked on my grief, worked on my anger, worked on many things. The whole total experience transformed me. And I can't even begin to tell you how that was for me. And I came home and went straight to the hospital. Michael was in the hospital, and he responded to how I was. We were quite close, and he started to get better, and he was sent home. He was walking where before he couldn't walk. He was eating, which before he wasn't able to even eat. He was getting better. He was still pretty weak, but it was like a miracle. And so, I mean, we started planning his birthday. He was now 14. He was going to be 15, and we were planning where we were going to go. We wanted to go to Big Bear, which is a mountain nearby to Los Angeles. And we were planning this and went to the movies and went visiting people and did all kinds of wonderful things. It was a gift, really. At the end of this, he died almost suddenly. And according to the doctors who I gave them permission to do an autopsy, all his organs had failed. They could not understand why he had gotten better those 6 weeks. It was unbelievable to even, they were beside themselves with not understanding what had happened. Anyway, so after he died, I got a phone call from the district, the school district that I worked for, Long Beach, California school district. Would I come back? I had taken a small leave at the end of Michael's illness. And because a teacher had walked out of the class and left the kids, they were 12 boys, ages 13, 14, and maybe even 15. And they had been throwing chairs and desks and books, and they just went bizarre. And the teacher just walked out. So I went back and I went into this room, and they were doing all this stuff, and I just sat there and watched them. And these were special classes. There were 12 children in a class, and you had an aide, and the aide kept saying, should I call the principal? And I kept saying, no, no. I just sat on a desk and watched them just throwing things and jumping all around. Finally, one of the boys came over to me and said, why aren't you mad? And I said to him, no, I'm not mad. I'm just watching you having a good time. I said, you know, I just lost my son, and I wish he were here doing this. And they immediately, all of 12 of them came over to me. What do you mean you lost your son? What do you mean? So I told them the whole story. And I have to tell you that never did I have any trouble with these kids after that, ever. And in fact, the principal called me a miracle worker. Well, I thought a lot about Gestalt therapy and my experience and what was happening with these kids, and what is it that got them to just come over and be different with me now. And I thought, well, for one thing, I was just myself. I was really real with them and telling them what was going on. And somehow that got to them, but it was more than that. And in Gestalt therapy, you know, we have we know that not much can happen if you don't have a relationship, even the thread of a relationship. And I was thinking that probably in the way that I was with them, they felt that something was going on between us. Some people call Gestalt therapy actually these days a relational therapy, like the relationship between the therapist and the client is prime. And actually, it's based on, in Gestalt therapy writings, the writings of called the I-thou relationship, the writings of Martin Buber. And so it's a relationship that where two people come together as equals, not one is not better than the other. Or just because I have degrees and an education and experience and I'm older doesn't make me a better person. And it's that attitude that the client feels, especially kids. Kids are very sensitive, and they may not show it, but they're very, very sensitive and can sense right away if you're, you know, looking down on them, or you're impatient with them, or whatever. If they feel equal, if they feel respected, if they feel honored, they respond. And so I developed a therapy process, which I started using based on Gestalt therapy. And the first one, of course, is the relationship. If the child cannot make a relationship, if you don't feel some kind of a relationship, the focus of the therapy becomes the relationship. And so then the next step in this process is contact. And Gestalt therapy writes a lot about contact. Contact means being fully present. If I am fully present in my connections with a child, the child is more likely to be present with me. Gestalt therapy is a holistic therapy. It deals not only with talking about what's going on, but it deals with the whole person, the senses, the body, the emotions, and the intellect as well. So when you're in contact, you're using everything you have available to you to stay in contact with with the child. Most children I have worked with have trouble making contact. They may have trouble making contact with other children, with teachers, with parents, with siblings, with just with books. They have trouble making contact, and that's something that we evaluate and maybe spend some time working. And one of the things that we notice, or we call those the things that help you make contact, are your senses. Looking, listening, touching, tasting, smelling, all of those help you make contact with another person. And many children just need some experience in using their senses. So we may spend some time working on playing games and other things where they use their senses, strengthen their senses. And this does help children stay more in contact. I mean, I could go on and on and on about this. I'm just doing this brief summary. And the next step would be contact would be the self. Most of the kids that I have worked with over the years, and it's a lot of years because, you know, I just turned 93, do not feel good about themselves. And the self is inhibited. It's not strengthened. And so we might spend a good bit of time helping children feel better about themselves. And one way to feel better about yourself is to know yourself. And we might spend a lot of time doing what we call self-work, helping them know everything about themselves, what they like, what they don't like, what they want, what they don't want, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. Anytime they make a statement about themselves, it strengthens the self. So we spend a lot of time maybe doing what we call self-work, and that comes right out of Gestalt therapy. And the next step in that process is the emotions. And we know that unless you have a support from yourself, it's hard to express emotions. You need that support, and it will lead right into expressing emotions when you strengthen the self. And of course, when we work with children, we have a lot of ways of doing these things. We use things that children love to do. Draw pictures, we work with clay, we use picture cards, sand tray, music, anything we use that children will respond to. And there's no law that says that therapy can't be fun. Therapy can be fun, and many children find it wonderful. Just this one little story that comes to my mind of a girl who didn't want to come in whatsoever, and she just refused to come in, and her mother had come, and so she decided to just carry her daughter, who was 9 years old, into the session. And the daughter came in, and of course she wouldn't speak and she wouldn't respond, but I noticed that she was looking at this shelf I had of miniatures that we use in the sand tray to make scenes in the sand. And when I asked her mother to leave, the girl didn't like this at all. The mother went into the waiting room, and I said to the girl, would you like to do something here? Use these miniatures and put them in the sand? And she just was happy to do this because she had been looking at them and wondering about them and never thought that it was something she could do in a therapy session. So she began to put items into the sand, and I just sat next to her and I didn't say anything the whole time. She put things in the sand, she put them back on the shelf. She took other things and put them, looked at them and put them in the sand, moved them around and then put them back. And finally the time was up because I'd spent a good deal of time talking to the mother before this. Anyway, time was up and she went into the waiting room and went home. The mother called me up. She said, she can't wait to come back to the next session. I mean, she didn't even want to come in at all. And she sang all the way home. I don't know what you did. So I couldn't say to the mother, I didn't do anything. You know, I didn't do anything. I just sat there and nodded and smiled as she played with the items. And I don't know, to me, it, it, I I thought about that a lot. What was it about what was happening that she went home singing and wanted to come back? I guess she felt she'd had a little fun and that she was safe. And there was something about her time that I sat there while she did these things that she needed to do by herself. I'm still thinking about it. So we've had a lot of experience taking these Gestalt concepts into our work. And I mean, there's a lot more involved, but you know, after my experience, my personal experience, and after my son died, I went into a Gestalt therapy training in the Los Angeles Gestalt Therapy Institute at that time, and trained to be a Gestalt therapist. I was in the training for over 3 years and became a certified Gestalt therapist, and not only worked with adults, but also with a lot of adolescents and children, and applied a lot of the concepts that I learned. And, you know, there are many books written now about Gestalt therapy, many, many books. It is not the empty chair technique. I've had people say, oh, I use Gestalt therapy. I do the empty chair all the time. Well, I spent 3.5 years training to be a Gestalt therapist. It took me that long to understand how to do the empty chair. No, not at all. I mean, it's just a technique that anybody could use, actually. But it is pretty impressive. I had a mother come in one time. She wanted to bring her son, who was 16, into the therapy, and he wouldn't come. And so she came, and we talked, and she spent a lot of the time complaining. He does this, he does that, he drives me crazy, I don't know what to do. He won't do what I tell him. And she went on and on. And I just listened. And finally, there was a pause, and I said, I want you to imagine that your son is sitting in this chair, an empty chair, in this chair, and tell him what you just told me. Oh, she thought that was kind of silly. And I said, oh, just do me a favor, just do it. You know, just say, there he is. I don't like how you're behaving. So she started to do that. And her voice got lower and slower. And finally I said to her, what are you feeling right now? And she burst into tears. She said, I'm a rotten mother. It's all my fault. I've never known how to be a mother to him. His father isn't around, has never been around. I don't know what to do. And she started crying and crying. And finally she stopped and she said, I need some therapy and how to be with him. And I suggested they both come in next time, and they did. And we worked several sessions about helping her know more about how to be a parent. And anyway, just a little story of how we do spend some time, we pay attention to the body as Gestalt therapists do, and we pay attention to what's happening, what the body is. I might, in the middle of a session, even say to a kid, what are you feeling in your body right now? And the kid, but first they say, I don't know. They always say, I don't know. And I say, well, you know what you feel? How's your stomach? How's your, yeah, I have a little pain in my stomach. How did you know that? And we go from there. There's usually some emotion emerges. This is just really a short summary of our work as it connects to Gestalt therapy. You may have questions. I'm delighted to answer any questions. And I hope you understood what I was saying. I know sometimes when talking about something, I might talk too fast. So I hope you've got, I know a lot of you are new with English. So I'll just say goodbye right now, and I'm happy to answer questions, however we get them. Okay. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, absolutely.
All right. I want to recommend your next presenter, Peter, wrote this incredible book called Window Frames, and it's all about my 2-week training and more, way more. And he not only describes the training, which I don't do anymore. I did 27 years, every 2-week training. In 6 years, I did 2 of them. Anyway, Window Frames is an incredible book, and he discusses many of these points because I gave them in the training. It's a wonderful book. I also want to show you, I don't know if you could see it.
We can see it, yeah.
Yeah. Also, many of you, I'm glad that many of you thought that Windows was your Bible. And, I wrote it a long time ago, and when I was really mulling over a lot of the Gestalt therapy concepts, but the publisher of this book said, get rid of all that theoretical stuff. I don't want that in the book. He said, I want it just to be a book that people would use, and I don't want them bogged down with all those theory things. So I was also, by the way, this was also my PhD dissertation, this book. And he said, get rid of all that stuff you put in your dissertation. He called it the PhD window dressing. And I did. So the book does not have some of those, like about the therapeutic process I developed and all that. But it is in this book, which is Hidden Treasure. This is my second book, just in case you haven't heard of it. So just wanted to show you those. And I appreciate the fact that so many of you are familiar with Windows for Children and never dreamed in a million years when I was writing it that it would be so widespread to so many countries. Man, it's wonderful, wonderful. Okay, thank you.